What's up, comic book fans? Anchorpete here, and I'm with my good friend, Mr. Danny Torkel. Danny, how you doing on this Saturday morning?
Doing pretty well in my bedroom because Athena and Charlotte are watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the living room. So
Oh, I saw you said on Twitter that they were watching the musical episode, right?
we watched the musical episode yesterday. It holds up. It's still great. Sometimes I run and I listen to the soundtrack on like my phone, and yeah, it's probably still to this day the greatest musical episode of any TV show. Uh, Maybe that or Scrubs.
Oh, well, I've actually never seen the musical episode of Buffy. I kind of
Wow.
stopped watching Buffy after a certain point. My wife is a tremendous Buffy fan,
She
and
commented. I know she's got to get you on that.
we'll probably watch it with Pepper eventually. But
Yeah.
we're talking about Buffy and all this other stuff. But today we are here to talk about Raised by Wolves, episode 4 of season 2, and we are on the Comic Books Transformed channel. By the way, Danny's got a nice little X-Men shirt, which is appropriate for a Saturday morning. He's from the Lastercast channel, where we talk about horror shows. And boy, Danny, on this Raised by Wolves episode, was there a lot of horror?
Yeah, this was great. This was another fantastic episode. Um, Again, blending that like intense sci-fi with like moments of horror and so much setup for what could possibly be coming. Made me very excited to where the show's going.
Yeah, there was multiple times where I wanted to just send you a message on Twitter and just be like, "Oh my god, this part! Oh my god, this part!" Like so many things. This show it's almost like ridiculous the amount of craziness that happens on this show in one episode. You know.
Yeah.
So, do you want to just kind of address the crazy moments, all the story beats, beat by beat? We could do like we did last time, where we do like each character.
Yeah. Who do you want to start with? I mean, Mother. There's there was one moment in this episode that I legitimately like. I was sitting down, so I didn't take a step back, but it like took me back, like where I was just like, "Whoa, what the?"
Yeah.
And that moment, I don't know if it's the same for you, but it involves. It doesn't involve Mother. It involves other characters.
Is it the thing
So
with Vril? That part?
with who?
Vril, the android? Okay, why don't we just do that? Let's just talk about Marcus and his followers, and we
Yeah.
talked about that moment because that really stands out. That moment. So basically, just to put it into context, Marcus, when we saw the last episode, he had Paul and he had Campion and he had that other girl that was from the original Mithraic kids group, and they had made it to the beach where Marcus has his little cult that's starting to grow, and then at one point in the last episode, the Trust had given Paul back his mouse. And boy, did they do something really twisted with that mouse. You want to tell everybody what happened?
They basically turned the mouse into a chemical weapon to infect and kill the members of Marcus's tribe. They're in the church where you have the big the image of the golden, what, it's the
Saul.
tree, right? Uh,
Isn't it
or
like
the
just
sun.
that sun? The sun that
Yeah,
they
of
have?
Saul
Yeah.
behind them, or Soul. I keep it's hard to say. So like I feel like I keep saying like Saul, like Better Call Saul, or Soul,
Right.
because it's obviously the sun, but
Right.
you get the point.
Right.
They're in that cave and the mouse is there, and then all of a sudden one of Marcus's followers starts like seizing and his skin starts like bubbling, and
Yeah.
Paul himself starts to get infected with this like, it almost turns his skin into like scales which cover his
Mm-hmm.
whole body and end up encasing him. uh and yeah, they basically the Trust put some type of chemical weapon into the mouse, and the mouse detonated and took out Paul and one of Marcus's followers. And yeah, it was a brutal scene, and that leads to like more brutal scenes with Decima and the android girl, who is maybe in like was in a budding relationship with Campion. They're getting along in this kind of romantic way, even though he's an atheist and she's a even though he's not Campion because he
Right.
believes in Saul. He just believes he's evil.
Yeah.
This show's so goddamn complex. I love it. But yeah,
And nuts.
so Marcus's like faith and his entire cult's faith is tested right off the bat with this like chemical attack from the Trust, of which of course the Trust didn't tell anybody else, and Mother considers obviously Campion, but also considers Paul and the other girl as her children. And so putting them in danger puts the Trust in Mother's line of sight.
Crosshairs. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it leads to that one scene ends up basically setting up where this episode goes in terms of
Mhm.
Mother going after Marcus and uh, everything else that really happens. I don't know, like how much you want me to talk, or do you want to like go to
Yeah.
other things?
Let's unpack that before we get to the crazy moment too that you're referencing too. So first of all, that mouse like explodes and Paul just starts freaking out, and then he has those like bumps, like you said, that were like scales. And that made me think about those sort of like lizard people that are on the planet, these sort of like de-evolved people. And it's making me really wonder what's truly going on here. Like, how did those people de-evolve? Are androids involved? There's obviously this kind of feeling of like there's been a civilization here before. Somehow that civilization has actually influenced the Earth civilization or the people that have come from Earth. So that's real interesting. I really want to uncover that. But I was kind of blown away when Paul like essentially died. And the way that the show is, the nature of this show, where the characters can like die and come back, even the human ones kind of come back too. I was like, okay, I don't think this character is gone completely. And by the end of the episode, we see that he potentially could come back. But that scene itself was shocking. Then it led to this one scene, which was definitely the standout, shocking scene of the episode. It's kind of funny because Sherry and I used to watch Yellow Jackets, and on the Twitter, they would always be like, "Oh, you can't handle gore? Then watch out for this scene at this point in time, this point in time." And I feel like you could do that to Raised by Wolves, because it's like, "Oh, you can't handle intense imagery? Don't watch this part. Don't watch this part. Don't watch this part." And so they continue to push the standard, the barrier of like what they can show. And last season we talked about Mother kind of killing an infant right in front of us, but it was an android, so it's like, okay, oh, it's like this thing where Brian and I are big Transformers fans, right? And with Transformers comics and cartoons, they can just rip the Transformers to shreds and do horrible things to them, grotesque, brutal, gory things to them. But it's like, oh, they're robots, so it's okay that this is a kid's cartoon, right? And so that's the way that this show is too. It's like, oh, they're androids, so we can just slash their face off and they can fall off a mountain and they're like 11 years old. Cool. Okay. So what I'm alluding to here is that Vril helps Campion get away from the Mithraic once they go after him. And her
Well, isn't she
mother,
isn't she don't they like because she had led them there the first time, they basically say like you've messed up and we need to discipline you. But and so she goes after Campion.
yeah,
And uh and you get this where she's basically going after him to bring him back to Marcus. And then we
right.
get this scene where this like monster jumps out of the friggin' acid ocean.
So,
And so I'm thinking this is going to be like the big crazy scene of the episode.
right.
And
Nope.
Campion like bashes its head in with a rock. And she's like, why would you risk your life for me? I'm an android. You're a human. And
Right.
he's like, because I like you. You were friends, this and that. And then the other guy, the first guy who left the the convent.
But
What
like
the
the cult people? Oh
no
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 no! Oh,
the
there's the trust,
collective.
the collective, the collective.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
guy
yeah,
who left the collective to join up with Marcus, he
yeah.
goes after them, and now he's uh, now he's
Like
they're
shooting
the
at
two of
them.
them are like on they're running from this guy,
Right.
and when Campion gets away, uh, keeping in mind that Vril, right, that's her name,
Vril.
she's a robot, but she has the imprint of Decima's daughter in her, who
That's so messed up.
in like a very quick throwaway line, we find out that Decima murdered her daughter.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
She's like, "What are you gonna do? Kill me again, mom?" And I was like, "Whoa, okay." Like that was kind of sort of hinted at, like that she felt guilty about what had happened to her daughter, which is why she downloaded her like memory into this android. But to have
Right.
it like so explicitly said, and to punish her, they like she takes like the Mithraic knife and starts slashing her face. So you see her like human face with these huge gashes in it with like
Yeah.
the metal underneath. And then it gets to a point where it's like it reminded me of that scene in Poltergeist where one of the scenes that just
Oh yeah. I know what you're
murdered
talking
my childhood when I was a kid,
about.
where the
Yeah. Yeah.
cameraman goes into the
Yep.
bathroom and he starts peeling his face off,
Yep.
and like you see like the puppet skeleton underneath his face, and he's like,
Ah.
and then he like
Ah.
snaps back, and it was all
Right.
in his head. But that's what her face looked like, where it's
Right.
like the outline of a human head, but now it's just this like robot face.
Yeah.
And then she takes off running, and you're just like, what is going on? This is
Yep.
so oh, it was terrifying. Like we both have young
Young
daughters.
daughters.
Like the idea that like Decima could do this, you know, I remember, were you a Walking Dead fan? So like I remember
Oh,
identifying with
I was a Walking Dead fan. I'm sorry. Yeah. I stopped like maybe by the second season.
yeah, did you ever meet the governor?
Oh yeah, yeah. I saw his stuff with his daughter.
So like I actually was like team governor because like I totally understood his I like perspective of like his daughter got bit, but he can't bring himself to like put a bullet in his daughter's zombie head.
Right.
And
Right.
that's kind of how I felt watching this, where it's like I it like affected me watching this scene so much. Like it made me uncomfortable, but in like a good way of like this show is so effed up.
Yeah, it
And
really is. And it's funny because like there's not a huge buzz about it. Like on Twitter, I follow the account, and so I'll see sometimes they'll retweet things that people say about it. But in general, you don't see it in like your Google feed or whatever. It's this like huge budget show that's connected to Ridley Scott that has crazy moments every episode, and yet it's like people don't talk about it. It's weird.
it's
So
funny,
I'm glad.
every week since we started covering the show, I've seen more and more people on Twitter who
Yeah,
their exact quote is, "Am I the only one watching Raised by Wolves? It's
yeah,
so good. Why don't more people watch it?" And I keep tweeting back at them, my buddy Pete and I watch it. We do a weekly uh, podcast conversation about it. Here's the
yeah.
link to Comic Books Transformed on YouTube. Uh, and yeah, it's like this, like Yellow Jackets, which is on Showtime, had massive buzz. Like people were talking about it. You couldn't, I didn't watch it because I don't have Showtime. I could not scroll one like for 1 second on Twitter without seeing something about Yellow Jackets. Even now, I'm still seeing people calling out the cast for how great it was, um, and you know, so many shows. Like obviously, Peacemaker is a comic book
HBO Max.
show,
Yeah,
so that's going to get a lot of buzz because it's John Cena and it's DC. but like Succession and all these other shows have like this massive amount of buzz, and it makes me think like sci-fi is still, even now, even with all of the big money projects, Avatar has 5 sequels coming out, but sci-fi on TV is still a sort of niche thing. And it this show isn't Lost. Lost was like real good looking people crash on an island and
Right.
they're going to get hot and sweaty and run around and there's mysteries. And yeah, there were some sci-fi elements to it, but
Right.
it was mostly about the drama of the characters. This is pure sci-fi.
Right.
Androids, uh, you know, uh,
Colonization of another
yeah,
planet.
giant robotic god figures.
Yeah.
So this is other planets.
Yeah.
This is old fashioned sci-fi, and it makes me feel like I always we've talked about Dune a lot. It makes me feel like if they decided, if like Denis Villeneuve decided, oh, I'm gonna make Dune as a 10-part series on HBO Max, nobody it wouldn't be getting the buzz that it's being. It wouldn't be nominated for awards the way that the movie did, because like I
Yeah.
guess like these like big budget sci-fi in movies still works, but on
Yeah.
TV it doesn't seem like it pulls the weight that these other types of shows do.
I mean, that's a really good point. And that's the kind of thing that we could spend like almost a whole show just talking about that. I think what's interesting about what you're saying is everyone loves Star Wars, right? But Star Wars is essentially just fantasy with science fiction trappings.
Yeah,
Whereas
and
when something is like straight up fantasy, like 2001, or like the movie Sphere that's based on like a Michael Crichton book, or like Ex Machina, or Annihilation, or Arrival, right? These are just like straight up sci-fi. They're not fantasy. They never reach that big audience because, it's funny because we have our channel, the Lasercast, and we're always talking about how horror doesn't get the respect it's due, or like horror is always kind of treated like, oh, you're into horror, you're kind of a weirdo
I,
on the side. Sci-fi is even more niche than horror. Because
yeah.
it's like, oh, the nerds like sci-fi. It's not like cool, even though
Yeah, and before anybody comes and goes, well, all the Star Wars shows, Mandalorian, Boba Fett, that's Star Wars. That's not sci-fi. Star Wars is its own friggin'
right,
multi-billion-dollar entity at this. That's like saying, oh, well, people like Star Trek. Yeah, because it has a 50-year built-in fan base. It I don't think if all the Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans loved sci-fi, they'd be watching Raised by Wolves. They
yes,
just love Star Wars and
right,
Star Trek, and
right,
like you don't watch Star Wars movies and shows and go, oh God, I love science fiction. No, you go, I love Star Wars.
right,
That's what it
right,
is.
right.
Like, and you could say the same about the MCU. There's plenty of people who probably never read a comic book in their life that run to the movie theater to see Spider-Man No Way Home because,
Right.
oh my God, I can't wait to see another MCU movie because it's like a big blockbuster movie. And they don't care
Yes.
about the lore that like we might, or you and Brian do when you talk about all the shows, all the Marvel MCU shows on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
And like Chris and I were just talking before, we've with this new Texas Chainsaw movie, you mentioned the Lasercast and horror, and it is very similar where it's like horror fans, where I'm seeing now where they're like conditioned to saying like, we're just so lucky that we get these movies, don't complain about them, we're just lucky to have them. And I'm like, you know you, some things that are good and
yeah.
things that are uh, fun are not mutually exclusive. Like you can make good stuff within a genre film or a genre series. You don't just have to accept crap because we're lucky to have it.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Really good point. I mean, we are definitely, both of us are on our soapboxes right now, right? But it's because we love this kind of content so much, and it's this kind of show feels so rare. You know, it's just so rare that you have a big budget sci-fi show that's coming out
Yeah.
on a weekly basis with these oh shit moments, you know? And so, I mean, I can see right now we have some viewers going on. If you guys want to comment too,
Oh,
love getting comments from our viewers too. But like with this show, I think its longevity is ultimately going to be based upon the characters. And so we talked about Marcus, and there's one thing that we didn't kind of cover with Marcus yet. I didn't make the connection that the thing that Mithray guy stuck in his mouth in the first season was Mother's eyes. Did you know that?
me neither.
Yeah.
As soon as it happened, I was like, of course, that makes so much sense. I'm an idiot.
Right.
But yeah, I because like we had even talked about like where is this coming from, and so like that's the complexities of this show. Like sometimes I just miss things that are in plain sight. But yeah, that sequence where, which also makes sense now when you look at it in retrospect, he was able to overpower Father, which no human should be able to do, and he was basically able to overpower Mother until
Yeah.
Campion hit him with a rock, and
Right.
she was able to turn the tides on him. And that scene where she like magnetizes the eyes out of his body up his throat. Oh my god. And then she doesn't even wipe them off. She just puts them right. Like part of
Yeah.
me was like, "There's COVID, no."
Yeah. Oh God. What's the name of it? Kepler 22 COVID. Oh no.
Yeah.
But what do you call it? That was very reminiscent of Total Recall, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, right? When he pulls the implant out of his head. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah.
So that kind of covers the whole Marcus arc for the most part for that episode. With Mother, she then gets those eyes. We can talk about Mother now. She gets her eyes back. She's back in necromancer mode. She flies. She goes all the way to the Trust. She's upset that the Trust essentially, you mentioned this before, put her children in danger. We're going to kill some of her children. And so, you know, you can't mess with Mother's children. So she's doing her scream. She's just obliterating people at the collective. And the Trust lets her in, right? And do you think that the Trust is destroyed at this point now?
It certainly looks like it. I mean, I don't know if it's destroyed or they turned it off. Like it's a robot. I don't know if there's like a way to turn the Trust back on. But she certainly looked like she used her breath to melt the area next to it. And like that whole sequence reminds me so much of like Prometheus and Alien. Like it reminded me like what she was doing to turn the Trust off reminded me of the end of Alien when Ripley is putting in the self-destruct into the Nostromo and she's like pulling up those things, flip and put. I love that interaction. Also, I love that like the Trust lets her in because the Trust realizes he's a supercomputer. He knows they don't have anything that can stop her when she's in necromancer mode.
Right.
So he basically tries to like communicate with her on a, you know, droid to droid level, like a real science, sci-fi logic based approach.
Right.
And it all comes back, like you said, to keeping her children safe and doing what she can do to make sure that, you know, above all, she's a caregiver for her kids. And that means she's going to turn the Trust off, and she's going to effectively take over as the leader of the collective.
Yeah. This show's so ridiculous. It's like the tables turn multiple times every episode. It's just like, oh, now I'm in power and you're the one that's going to get killed. And then like 10 minutes later, well, I'm in power. Now you're going to die. It happens every episode.
Did you notice? I don't know if this was intentional or it looked like as she was making the speech to the people in the collective, that just like more and more people behind Father just like basically started like tuning out and like going away to like do their tasks.
Right.
And to me, it had that idea of like, well, great, another supercomputer android. Like the Trust, Mother, doesn't matter. I'm just going to go look at my ball, plow the fields. You know,
Right,
so I
right.
really enjoyed that part of it. It
Right.
had this idea of like there is such a social hierarchy in the collective, and like they made this point also. I kept thinking, and we've talked about this, the whole religious aspects of like Marcus's group is a cult,
Yeah.
but the atheists, for them, atheism is a bona fide religion,
Hmm.
and it Marcus even has that line about killing, using kids as like soldiers. That's
Yeah.
something that atheists do,
Right.
and so you see the way they there are no right and wrong groups. It's just two sides of humanity that are like getting further and further. It's very similar to like modern America, where it's just there's just polarizing forces. You could call them whatever you want. You can call them liberal and conservative, or Mithraic and atheist, and they pull apart, and they go to war with each other. It's
Yeah.
we just don't have a
Very good point.
necromancer yet.
Yeah, not yet, unfortunately. But it's funny they have like a necromancer video game, right? And that girl Vita was playing it. That was so funny. That was a funny scene too with her and mother. Like that was like like a teenager having some drama right there.
Oh
You're a
yeah.
bad mom, It's like do your work.
What did you think of that? The glowing figure that we saw in
Okay.
this episode.
Okay, so let's get to that. Yeah. So we've kind of talked about how this show almost feels like Ridley Scott is just sort of telling his story, but he kind of hijacked the creator's story, right? He's got the aliens in there. That was like the creature in the water and the serpent, right? And Mother's the androids, and then you even have the Trust, which is like the AI and aliens, which is called Mother. But the glowing figure, that's something that's kind of unique that isn't an alien at all or Prometheus or anything, And so I think that it is Saul. And for my interpretation, I'm thinking that this show is kind of like Westworld and kind of like Battlestar Galactica. I've mentioned this before, two shows where they have essentially androids throughout the whole thing. And I think that in both shows, there's the idea of like, you think this has only happened once, but this happened multiple times. And so I literally think that is Saul, and this whole thing has happened before, and it's been taken apart, and then Father's essentially brought Saul back. What do you think?
Oh, okay. So that's what I was going to say. So you think that the life form that Father is creating is the glowing, like, because that was what I got at the end, at least. Not because Marcus sees it.
Right.
They all see it in Marcus's camp, but then we also see it at the very end in a scene that I have to think was evoking Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah. Right.
The famous scene where the light's glowing from outside the door, and you get the door
Right.
open and just the glowing light of the alien force.
Yeah.
I loved that scene where they pour all of the android blood,
Fuel
uh,
blood.
uh yeah, on, and nothing happens, and then of course they turn around and it all gets sucked up right in, and you're like, oh boy.
Yeah.
So
That's I'll just let me say one thing. I mean, maybe you're about to say this too, but that actually brought up one of my favorite parts of the episode when Father goes to give Hunter back his medallion that he wore, and when the fuel blood's not working, Father's like, "Oh, can I have your medallion again for luck?" And it's kind of alluding to the idea that he is starting to become like a believer as well. I really like that part.
yeah, I mean, we've spoken at length about how much we like Abubakar Salim and his performance on the show. What I was just going to say is it's building up to an inevitable necromancer mother versus whatever
Right.
this glowing object is.
Right.
There's still a giant serpent in a cave cage
Oh
that is.
yeah.
There's also, now we know that there are living humanoids from the deep in the acid water. So it's like every episode, this show just brings out more and more crazy shit
Yep.
that like just gets me more and more pumped up for the next episode.
Yeah.
I still have that fear that they're going to keep dragging stuff on, but I feel like it's like Lost and I were in a really bad relationship, and I had a really bad breakup, and I take those wounds into new relationships.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I love this show. This was a great episode.
It was.
This might have been my favorite episode of the season 2 so far.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the exact same thing too. Yeah, I think this is my favorite episode as well. A lot of crazy moments, and they're just kind of like clarifying things of like, okay, this is where we're going with these characters, with these arcs. So real interesting stuff. And for me, it was just like a big revelation to know that Mother's eyes were in Marcus. That like everything kind of clicked then. Even like his veins in his face that were moving, they went away once those eyes came
Yeah.
out, you know. So yeah. Dude, I am always down for talking about this show with you and watching it. I'm so glad to have someone to talk to about it with. If you guys are new to this channel, I usually talk with my friend Brian about like comic book adaptations, but we're kind of branching out and doing other things. And luckily we have Danny from the Lasser Cast, my other channel, to talk about this show with. So Danny and I are going to talk about the movie Spring on our other channel, so you guys can check that out. That movie, I mentioned this last time, that's made by Benson and Moorhead, who are going to be working on the Moon Knight show that's coming out. And, you know, their names are kind of just growing in popularity right now. So I would definitely recommend watching Spring as well. And especially if you like fucked up shit. There's some really fucked up, weird things in that movie too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Danny, thank you so much, my man. And we will see you guys next Saturday.